Hello friends, Jim with Science Talk. I want to discuss with you what's going on with the forest. Forest carbon emissions are set to grow. The tropical forest could be at growing risk from climate change. We're already seeing stuff going on. And as they die, rising forest carbon emissions could threaten much of the Earth's life. Okay, so a little background before we get into the study here. We know what's going on with the clear cutting of forests, especially tropical forests, like in the Amazon. We know that when you have such huge biomass of vegetation, they can draw down a great amount of CO2 versus, say, grasslands. Grasslands don't. If I have, say, an acre of forest, tropical forest, versus an acre of grasslands, the grasslands draw down much less CO2 than the forest does. But now we know about the clear cutting that goes on, not just in the Amazon, but in forests, temperate forests around the planet. And now, unfortunately, with the new president of Brazil, Bolsonaro, he has basically declared open season on the Amazon. He's basically saying he's outdoing Trump. Imagine that. He's basically telling the companies, come on in. Clear cut, mine, do whatever the hell. The Amazon has often been called the lungs of the planet. It's basically putting us on a fast track to doom. I don't like to use hyperbole often, but that's not hyperbolic. If he goes through with those plans, humankind's in deep shit. We're already in deep shit. We'll be in deeper shit. All right. Well, we already know with the addition of more and more greenhouse gases, how that could be exacerbating and maybe accelerating warming and climate change that goes with it. The world's great tropical forests, home to most of the world's organisms, immense stores of carbon from the atmosphere, could soon start to release more carbon than they absorb. Right now, it's a sink. It might soon become a source. I discussed with you how the permafrost in the Arctic was a sink, but now as the permafrost thaws, it's becoming a source. Here's another situation where an area that's a sink could become a source for carbon, i.e. putting more of carbon compounds into the atmosphere, exacerbating the situation, setting up for an even greater positive feedback loop. If this happens, most likely result of exploitation, drought, extremes of heat, then the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere will continue to rise very quickly, and with them atmospheric oceanic temperatures and the threat of catastrophic climate change, as well as what the implications to life on the planet. So, Edward Mitchell, who is an earth scientist at the University of Edinburgh in the UK, spells this all out in a recent article in the journal Nature. And he spoke in the typical prose of science, the using the language of the science that scientists use, but he really didn't pull no punches. He was quite direct in his statements. And I'm going to quote from him. Tropical forests are in the process of switching from being approximately neutral to being a net source of carbon. This decline is caused by a combination of a decrease in the area of intact forests as well as an increase in temperatures and drought, which reduces the ability of trees to respond to higher CO2 concentrations by growing faster. He continues, with both forest loss and climate change likely to accelerate over the 21st century, tropical forests are likely to release ever more carbon, which will make limiting global warming to less than 2 degrees C above pre-industrial level very difficult. He's basically saying, if you continue doing what you're doing, or if the proposals that are being bannered about happen, it's going to get bad. All right, well, no, all of you know about the Paris Accord of 2015, how 195 nations said, "Oh, let's keep the level well below 2 degrees C by 2100." We're at 1.3, and we're probably going to blow past 2 degrees C in a very short time. 2030, 2040, 2050, take your pick. In the 2 centuries since humans began using fossil fuels in earnest, in ever greater quantities, the ratio of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen from about 280 parts per million to more than 400 parts per million. It's about 417 right now. And along with about a 1 degree C rise in global temperatures. Okay, so 2 centuries, more like 170 years. 170 years, we've increased it almost 140 parts per million in the atmosphere. Now, I'm not going to assume linear relationships, but if you wanted to go there, that's about a ppm per year. Once again, it comes down to the rate. Yes, Earth has seen huge, much higher levels of CO2 in the past, and it came down, and it went up, but not at these rates, much slower. And also keep in mind that the levels that they think they have for the deep path, we're talking going back to like the Cambrian, okay? Ordovician, Silurian, whatever those epochs are, okay? If you look at the data, there's a huge interval around it, a huge margin of error, huge confidence interval, because the error is so big. So that means that, let's just as an example, if I measure something and it's 1,000 ppms, but my errors are so high that my confidence interval is anywhere from 100 to 1900, that's a big error. The confidence interval means that basically 95% of the time, the true measure is between, in my example, 100 to 1900. Well, that's a huge, right? Be anywhere in there. So basically we're saying the results are unsure. But if I flip it around and I say, oh, I've got my measure 1,000 ppm, and I have a small error, my confidence interval is such that it could be from 994 to 1006. Well, that's really honing it down. We got, it's getting, that the true value is in this small interval. The smaller the confidence interval is, that means the smaller error, that means the more accurate is the measure. More precise. So when you look at, at charts and graphs and figures of past CO2 level, don't just look at the values, but take a look at the confidence interval, the errors associated with it. Take that into account. Wide range. So it's not as clear-cut as most would think. That's what I tried to do with my statistical videos, was to explain that concept. So, going back to this, going from 280 to 417, that's a huge jump in 170 years or so. Huge jump. And it's going up more and more. And another thing is when you look at the levels back then, why CO2 is so high, is the number of factors for it. And I may just very well do a separate video on that because this would be a side discussion that could run about 5-10 minutes. So there are factors for that, and I'll just do a separate video on that, and I'll have that follow this one. So, to contain this warming to no more than the 1.5 degrees C or 2 degrees C, humans need not only to switch at speed to renewable energy sources such as wind and solar, but to preserve and, if possible, restore the world's great tropical forests. Well, if you've got this Bolsonaro, whatever, getting ready to open up the Amazon for business, this ain't happening. Sad to say. The tropical forest performs 60% of all the world's photosynthesis. Next on there are the phytoplanktons in the ocean. They perform nearly the other 40%. Not all of it, obviously, because you have tundra and you've got grasslands and those kind of systems. But between tropical forests and including some temperate forests, along with the phytoplankton, that's the bulk of who does the photosynthesizing for us. In the tropical forests, in doing their photosynthesis, they capture about 72 billion, would it be, tons of of carbon from the atmosphere every year. Since very nearly the same levels of carbon go back into the atmosphere from plants, because plants do respire at night, they're going to take the glucose they made during the day and burn it off for energy at night. Fungi, animals, microbes, right? So, we've got this balance here. We need to preserve them. If we don't preserve them, then we start accumulating the carbon in the atmosphere. Yet, repeatedly, researchers have warned that their role as carbon absorbers is being eroded by exploitation, clearing, fire, drought, and heat. Once again, people are ignoring what us scientists are saying. Preservation of the tropical forest matters for reasons beyond their role as absorbers of atmospheric carbon. The tropics provide food and shelter for 91% of all terrestrial birds, 3/4 of all amphibians, land mammals, freshwater fish, ants, flowering plants, and marine fish. In other words, it's the most diverse ecosystem on the planet. Detailed economic studies have confirmed again and again the preservation of tropical biodiversity profits all humankind. Think about the plant species that have yet to be identified which hold potential medical uses. Medication. Where do you think we get medicine from? We get it from plants. Even greater number of studies have confirmed that species loss and extinction is on the increase, and climate change can only accelerate further mortality. So, in a second study in Nature, researchers say, hey, time is running out. Just as the great trees of the forest fall to human exploitation, drought, and heat, so do the millions of species that live in the canopies or shelter near the roots, right? They make their homes there. If the trees die, where are they going to live? They're at increased peril, and most of them are going to die. The tropics cover 40% of the land ecosystems. Right? So don't say, 40% of the Earth's surface. No, it's more 40% of the land system. 70% is covered by ocean, right? Most of the creatures in the tropics have not been named or described or found. So think of the biodiversity we're going to lose. So Josh Barlow, who is a conservation scientist at Lancaster University in the UK, he led this study that the second study I'm just sharing with you in Nature. The fate of the tropics will be largely determined by what happens elsewhere on the planet. While most of us are familiar with the impact of climate change on the polar regions, it is also having devastating consequences across the tropics, and without urgent action could undermine local conservation interventions. 50 years ago, this is a telling statement. 50 years ago, biologists expected to be the first to find a species. Now they hope not to be the last. Ouch. So basically what this second study is arguing is that the time is running out and documenting the die-offs that are happening, as well as the stresses placed on the tropical forests. So this is not these two studies do not paint a very nice picture. They paint very dire circumstances, and that's what the data is indicating. And it's about time that people started listening to science, and more especially politicians who set policies. Thank you for your time. Hey folks, this is Jim here reminding you to subscribe to this channel, to share my videos, tell others of the work that I do here. I also ask that if you are not already a patron at Patreon, to please consider becoming a patron at Patreon. You can find the information in the description box below the video. I'm asking you to help support the work that I do. I do not take any money from corporations or from any other sources, so the information I share with you is the actual science as it comes out of the peer-reviewed journals. So there is no BS, there's no propaganda, there's no agenda. It's just I present the science and I explain to you what it means, or at least my interpretations of it, based on my own experience as a scientist. I want this channel to grow. I consider, while I discuss many different topics here, you notice I do focus a lot on climate issues. I consider climate change to be the most pressing issue facing humanity today. Thus, I consider it important to disseminate this information to a wider and wider, more and more people. And I need your help to do this. So, yes, please subscribe. Please tell others of the work that I do here. Please share my videos on social media platforms, with your social media groups, what have you. We need to get this information out there. So for those of you who are supporting me on Patreon, I thank you greatly for your support and continued support. It does mean a lot to me. So together we can get this information to more and more people. Thank you. Thank you for your support.